My name's Evan Carter, and I've spent most of my life wandering the back roads and forgotten hollows of the Appalachians. I'm not a thrill seeker, not really. I just find peace in the silence most folks call loneliness. There's one place I used to go back to every summer: Blackpine Lake. It's hidden somewhere between the Virginia border and a stretch of ridge that doesn't even show up right on GPS. You wouldn't find it unless you knew what to look for: an old gravel turnout, a game trail, and the sound of trickling water that seems to come from nowhere. Locals don't talk about Blackpine much. They'll wave you off, but once, years back, an old store clerk in town told me the real reason. Said a man and his daughter went missing there sometime in the late 70s. Bodies never came back up, he said. But folks hear laughing across the lake on foggy nights. Sounds like a little girl playing. That August I went alone again. Just me, a tent, and enough supplies for 3 days. The water at Blackpine was still. Too still. By late afternoon, I'd set up camp at my usual spot, a small clearing by the water's edge. Across the lake, I saw movement. A man and a young girl were setting up camp on the opposite bank. Odd, but not impossible. There weren't many who knew this place, but maybe they'd stumbled on it. The man waved once. I lifted my hand back, a polite hello. The girl, maybe 10 or 11, stood close to him, watching me. She didn't wave. Just stared. That night I couldn't sleep. Around midnight I heard laughter. Soft, girlish, but the sound carried wrong, like it came from everywhere at once. I stepped out of my tent with my flashlight. Across the lake, their fire was still burning. I saw the man sitting by it, his head tilted down, shoulders slumped. The girl sat beside him, and she leaned her head on his shoulder. Sweet, I thought, until she lifted her face toward him. The way she looked at him froze me. I turned off my light, went back inside, sometime around 3. I woke up to the sound of footsteps outside my tent. Slow crunches in the dirt, then silence. Then a soft voice whispered, "Are you awake?" I froze. "Evan?" I didn't breathe. How did she know my name? Then another sound. A faint dragging, like bare feet brushing over leaves. I unzipped the flap just an inch. She was standing there. The little girl from across the lake. Moonlight washed over her pale face, and her eyes looked off. Too bright, too wide, like glass catching light. "Can I come in?" she asked. Her tone wasn't pleading or playful, just flat. "Where's your dad?" I managed. "He's waiting. He said you should come too." My pulse thundered in my ears. "It's late. You should go back to your camp." She smiled then. "Too big, too long. You should come see. The water's still tonight." Before I could answer, she reached out her hand through the tent flap. Her skin was ice-cold, damp, and when her fingers closed around mine, I couldn't pull away. Her grip was wrong. Too strong, like bones and sinew twisted too tight. I stumbled out, trying to pull free, but she just whispered, "Don't wake him. He doesn't like loud things." Then I realized it wasn't across the lake anymore. It was in the trees. We stopped by the shore. The girl let go of my hand. She stood perfectly still, head tilted toward the woods like she was listening to something. Only she could hear. "He's waiting," she said softly. I turned to run, and that's when I saw the man from earlier stepped out from between the trees. His clothes were soaked, dark patches clinging to him like wet bark. In one hand he held a knife. In the other, something maybe, or a piece of fabric torn from clothing. The girl smiled wider. "See, I brought him. I don't remember deciding to run. I just did." Branches tore at my arms. Behind me I heard her laughter. Sharp, not childlike anymore. Something older, deeper. When I burst out onto the main trail, the first gray hints of dawn were creeping through the trees. I ran until I reached the gravel turnout where I'd parked. My truck door was wide open. My gear scattered across the ground, wet like it had been dragged from the water. I drove straight to the ranger station 2 towns over. Told them what happened. They went up to check. When they came back, one of them, a big guy named Harlan, wouldn't look me in the eye. "Sir," he said, "there's no camp. No footprints except yours. And that place you said they were at, it's flooded. Been underwater for 20 years. He handed me back my map. That was 7 years ago. I don't go back to Blackpine Lake, not anymore. It was early November when I decided to take a solo hiking trip through the Monongahela National Forest in West Virginia. The first snow of the season had just dusted the upper ridges. I told myself I wanted quiet, time away from the noise of work, people, and my own restless mind. The trailhead was empty when I parked my truck. No other vehicles, no other hikers, just the echo of my boots crunching frost-hardened leaves. I slung on my pack and set out under a pale gray sky that promised snow before nightfall. Around midday, I reached a fork in the trail that wasn't on my map. One path looked freshly cleared, though the Forest Service hadn't listed any new routes in this area. I almost turned back, but curiosity got the better of me. The track wound downhill through dense spruce and laurel until I broke out into a narrow valley, where I saw a man walking ahead of me, maybe 50 yards down the path. But something about him felt off. He wasn't carrying a pack or even a water bottle. His clothes hung loose and dirty, dark jeans, a gray shirt. His movements were strange, too. Slow, meandering, like he didn't have a destination at all. He never turned to look at me, though I was making plenty of noise on the frozen leaves. I called out just a simple, "Hey man, you lost?" No response. He just kept walking, same pace, same odd shuffle. I stood there for a long moment, listening to the sound of his footsteps fade until all I could hear was the wind whispering through the pines. Then, just as I started to move again, the footsteps stopped. That should have been the moment I turned around, but of course I didn't. Curiosity and pride are dangerous things in the woods. I kept walking until the trees closed in and the light started to go. I hadn't seen the man again, and I told myself he'd probably veered off onto some side trail I hadn't noticed. I found a small clearing near a stream and set up camp. By the time I got my fire going, dusk had sunk into full darkness. The night was cold enough that each breath came out in little clouds of steam. At some point, I must have drifted off in my tent. I woke up needing to take a piss, my body stiff from the cold. My watch said it was just after 2 a.m. The fire had burned down to glowing coals. I unzipped the tent and stepped outside, shivering as the air hit me. The forest was silent, eerily so. I moved a few yards into the trees and was just finishing when I saw movement along the trail. Figure was walking toward my campsite. My first thought was that it was a late-night hiker, maybe lost and looking for light. But then my stomach turned cold. It was him. The same man I'd seen earlier. The one with no pack, no gear, just trudging aimlessly through the woods. Even in the dim glow of my dying fire, I recognized the same loose flannel and dark jeans. His gait hadn't changed either. Slow, deliberate, like each step was being decided after the last. I crouched behind a tree, heart hammering so loud I swore he'd hear it. He stopped at the edge of my camp and stood there staring at my tent. He didn't move for minutes. Then, without a sound, he crouched down behind a bush, directly facing where I'd been sleeping. That's when it hit me. He'd been following me all day. He hadn't wandered off the trail. He'd been tracking me. I stayed hidden, barely breathing, my fingers numb from gripping the handle of my knife. I kept thinking he'd leave, that he'd realize I wasn't there and move on, but he didn't. He just stayed crouched, still as stone, eyes fixed on the tent. I don't know how long we both waited. Maybe an hour, maybe longer. At some point, the fire went completely out and the world turned black. I could see him shift slightly. His head jerking, I wanted to run, to scream, anything, but instinct told me not to move. I don't remember falling asleep, but I must have drifted in and out of a half-frozen daze. When I opened my eyes again, the forest was gray with dawn. The bush where he'd been crouching was empty. My tent looked undisturbed, except for a set of footprints circling it in the thin frost. They led off toward the deeper woods and vanished. I packed up fast. I followed the trail back toward where I thought the truck was parked, but nothing looked familiar anymore. Or maybe your fear just makes it feel that way. Either way, I was lost. By mid-morning, I stumbled onto a dirt service road. I followed it for what must have been 2 hours before hearing the sound of an engine. An old pickup came around the bend and I flagged it down. He rolled down his window and frowned. "Son, you all right?" There was someone out there. Followed me. Watched my tent all night. He blinked, clearly trying to decide if I was crazy or just scared. "Ain't nobody out here this time of year," he said finally. For days afterward, I couldn't shake it. The story I'm about to share happened to me in last October, and even now, just talking about it makes my stomach tighten. Before I get into what happened, I should give you a little context about me and how I ended up in that nightmare in the first place. I'm part of a friend group that, honestly, I should have outgrown years ago. The kind of guys who always need to prove something, drinking too much, doing dumb challenges, pretending not to be afraid of anything. For a long time, I tried to be like them. Growing up, I was the skinny, quiet kid who got straight A's and couldn't take a joke. That kind of mix makes you a target anywhere you go. But I wanted friends, badly, so I learned to blend in. If the group was loud, I was loud. If they smoked, I smoked. If they jumped off a cliff into a lake, I jumped too. After a while, I wasn't sure who I really was anymore. By the time I got to college, I met someone I actually liked. A guy named Ryan, smart and level-headed most of the time. The only big difference between us was that he believed in all kinds of paranormal stuff. Ghosts, cryptids, cursed places, you name it. I've always believed there's a logical reason behind everything. Things are supernatural only until someone figures out the science behind them. Still, Ryan kept dragging me into his ghost hunts and urban explorations. Usually nothing happened except a few jump scares and a lot of laughs. But one night he brought up this place called Elkmont, an abandoned ghost town hidden deep in the Appalachian Mountains. He said it used to be a logging community that got swallowed by the forest after the Great Smoky Mountains were declared a national park. A few houses still stood, untouched, rotting, frozen in time. People claimed to see lights in the windows, hear voices, even laughter echoing through the woods at night. I told him flat out it sounded like nonsense, but Ryan was persistent. He'd already convinced 2 of his high school buddies and Derek's and Calebun to join. Eventually, he wore me down. I said yes, mostly because I didn't want to look like the coward who stayed behind. That was mistake number 1. Mistake number 2, leaving our phones in the car. Ryan said it would keep the experience authentic like the old-school ghost hunters did it. We only took a handheld camera, flashlights, and a bunch of weird little gadgets they swore detected energy or temperature changes. I still can't remember what half of them were called. We left at 5 in the morning, packed into Ryan's old Jeep, and drove 4 hours to the trailhead. The first 2 days on the Appalachian Trail were actually great. Cool weather, quiet air, nothing but the sound of our boots crunching leaves. At night, we camped under a sky so full of stars it didn't look real. I remember thinking, maybe this trip won't be so bad after all. It was day 3. The forest opened into a small clearing where the remains of the town sat. A few houses still standing, others collapsed into heaps of wood and stone. Ryan was excited, practically vibrating. Derek and Caleb followed him from house to house, filming and cracking jokes. I hung back, scanning the tree line. We decided to make camp a little ways from the houses, near an old stone foundation. As the sun started to go down, I caught movement, just a flicker, in the window of a nearby cabin. I thought it was my imagination. But a few minutes later, Derek came back from taking a leak and claimed he saw a shadow watching him through a window. Of course, he started freaking out about our first ghost encounter. I told them it was probably another hiker. Ryan just smirked and said, "Out here? Miles from any road? Come on, man." They brushed it off, but that uneasy feeling stuck with me. When the sun disappeared completely, they started talking about exploring again. For night footage. I wanted no part of it. But the thought of staying alone at camp wasn't much better, so I tagged along, We checked a few houses together. Nothing but broken furniture, old photographs, dust thick enough to choke on. But then Derek suggested splitting up to cover more ground. I told him flat out that was a terrible idea. He laughed, said, "What, you scared of ghosts, Evan?" I told him I wasn't scared of ghosts, just idiots. Still, I went back toward camp alone. I stoked the fire, sat near it, and tried to convince myself I was being paranoid. I remember staring at the dark silhouettes of the houses when I heard it. A scream, high-pitched. Human. It came from one of the houses deeper in the woods. My heart nearly stopped. I waited, hoping one of the others would come running, but no one did. After a few seconds that felt like minutes, I grabbed my flashlight and the gun I always carried on hikes, a small 9mm, and started toward the sound. When I reached the house, the front door was hanging crooked, half broken off its hinges. I pushed it open, called out, "Derek? Ryan? Caleb?" No answer. I turned a corner and froze. Ryan was slumped against the wall, half conscious, blood trickling down the side of his head. "Ryan!" I dropped to my knees and tried to shake him awake. His eyes fluttered but didn't focus. I saw a deep gash on his temple. Someone had hit him. Hard. That was the moment I realized this wasn't about ghosts. Someone was out there with us. I ran back outside, shouting for Derek and Caleb. Seconds later, Caleb came running from the opposite direction, pale and shaking. "Where's Derek?" I asked. He looked terrified. "I don't know. He went toward the creek to film some B-roll. I haven't seen him since." When I told him someone had attacked Ryan, all the color drained from his face. We dragged Ryan out of the house, laid him on the ground, and tried to stop the bleeding. We needed to get out, now. But when we reached our camp, everything was destroyed. Tents slashed open, gear scattered. The fire pits stomped out. Even the food bags were torn to shreds. It looked like whoever had attacked Ryan had come here too, maybe looking for the rest of us. We hid inside one of the sturdier houses and barricaded ourselves in a bathroom, using an old metal bar to jam the door shut. Ryan drifted in and out of consciousness while Caleb and I sat there in the dark listening. And then we heard it. Footsteps, moving from room to room. A door creaked open down the hall, then closed, then opened again. We didn't breathe, didn't move. At one point, the footsteps stopped right outside the bathroom door. The handle jiggled once, twice, and then silence. I swear I could hear whoever was breathing on the other side. After what felt like hours, the footsteps moved away. We sat there until the first light of dawn started slipping through the cracks in the wall. Ryan was awake enough to walk, though barely. We decided to grab what little we could salvage and start heading back toward the trailhead. But before we left, we saw something near the edge of camp, a figure lying on the ground. It was Derek. He was covered in cuts and bruises, his shirt torn, face bloodied. He was alive, barely, muttering nonsense about them and the house with no stairs. We got him up, half-carried him as we stumbled through the woods. About 10 minutes later, we ran into two hikers we'd met earlier on the trail, a couple named Aaron and Melissa. They saw the state we were in and immediately offered help. Thank God they had a satellite phone. An hour later, a rescue team arrived. They airlifted Ryan and Derek to a nearby hospital. Caleb and I spent the next few hours giving statements to park rangers. They searched the area for days. Never found anyone. No tools, no signs of another camp. Just our destroyed gear and the houses exactly as we'd left them. When I asked one of the rangers if anyone lived out there, he shook his head. Said Elkmont had been abandoned since the 1930s. But here's the part that still messes with me. When they reviewed the footage from Derek's camera, the last thing recorded was him walking into one of the cabins saying, "I think I hear talking inside." Then there's a sound like the camera hitting the floor, and the screen goes black. That was it. No one's ever been charged. No one's ever explained what happened. The police called it an isolated attack by an unknown assailant. I've gone over that night in my head 1,000 times. I keep wondering, Who would be living out there deep in the woods in those abandoned houses? And why would they go after us? A few weeks after the incident, I went back to campus and tried to go back to normal life. Ryan still got a scar on his head. Derek quit social media completely and refuses to talk about it. Caleb moved out of state. The story I'm about to tell you isn't one I ever wanted to share publicly. It just sits there in the back of my mind, waiting for me to think I'm over it. Then it creeps back. Everything started about a month ago. My name's Queer, Mark Webb, and I'm from a small Appalachian town called Hindman, Oz, Kentucky. It's one of those places that looks peaceful on the surface. Rolling hills, slow rivers, and thick green woods that seem to stretch forever. But the thing about growing up out here is you learn early that the woods keep secrets. My house sits at the edge of town. Beyond my backyard, the land slopes down into old forest. Miles of it. I grew up in those trees. My mom was the outdoorsy type. When I was a kid, she used to take me hiking every weekend, rain or shine. We'd camp under the pines. 2 years ago, my mom died suddenly. She was too young. Losing her broke something in me, something I didn't think could ever heal. I stopped camping, stopped hiking. I stopped going near the woods altogether. For almost 2 years, I just stayed inside, letting the silence eat at me. Then, a few months ago, something shifted. I started feeling restless, angry at how much of my life I'd wasted hiding from the world. So about a month ago, I decided to do something that scared me. I packed up my old tent, my mom's camp stove, and I went back into the woods just one night. A test run. It was close to home, maybe a mile into the tree line. I picked a familiar spot, flat ground near a small stream my mom and I used to visit. I set up camp and built a little fire, and I don't know how to explain it, but it felt right. And for the first time in 2 years, I felt like I could breathe again. I cried a little that night. Grief and relief all tangled together. But I fell asleep under the stars, feeling lighter than I had in a long time. When I got home, I decided to go again the next weekend. This time for sure, 3 nights here, deeper into the woods, farther than I'd gone in years. I planned it out carefully. Night 1 and 2 would be at familiar campsites. Night 3, I'd go south past the main trail, into an area I'd never explored. When the weekend came, I left at dawn. The first 2 days went smoothly. My legs burned from the climb, but it felt good. Real. The first campsite had a small family nearby, 2 little kids, a couple of dogs. It was comforting, hearing laughter through the trees. The second night, though, I was alone, or so I thought. Sometime after midnight, I woke up to the sound of footsteps going outside my tent, slow, like someone trying not to make noise. I froze, clutching the knife I kept beside my sleeping bag. Then I heard a tent zipper. Someone was setting up camp nearby. The next morning, a guy was sitting by a small fire maybe 20 yards from me. Late 30s, maybe 40s, tall, scruffy beard, and wearing a camo jacket that looked too clean for the woods. He greeted me first, said, "Hope I didn't spook you last night." Needed a place to crash before sunrise. I said it was fine. We chatted a bit, weather, trails, gear. He seemed normal enough, polite even. But something about him felt off, like he was studying me while we talked. His eyes didn't match his words. They didn't move much, just fixed on me the whole time, like he was memorizing every detail. We didn't mention where we were headed next. That's an unspoken rule among hikers. Never tell a stranger your route. Around 9, I packed up and left. I figured I'd never see him again. By noon, I left the main trail behind. I hiked 3 more hours until I found a clearing that looked good enough for camp. It had rained 2 days before, so the ground was soft and muddy. Some patches looked unstable, like they could swallow a boot if you weren't careful. The sun was starting to drop behind the ridges, and I didn't want to risk hiking in the dark. So I set up fast, tent, fire ring, all of it. By the time I finished, it was pitch black. That night, the forest felt different. I was starving. So I decided to cook something, some instant noodles, a can of beans. But when I went to gather firewood, That's when things changed. I walked maybe 30 feet from camp, flashlight in hand. The trees were thick, and the beam barely reached more than a few yards. I remember hearing the crunch of my boots on wet leaves and then hearing, oh, something else. A soft, deliberate shuffle to my right. I froze, turned off the flashlight instinctively, and stood still in total darkness. My breathing sounded too loud. My heart was pounding in my throat. Then I heard a man's voice. Calm. Close. Don't bother turning off the light, Mark. I can still see you. I can't describe what that did to me. My stomach dropped so fast I felt sick. It was the tone. Flat, steady, like whoever said it wasn't trying to scare me. I flicked the flashlight back on, swinging it toward the sound. I shouted, asking who was there. No answer. I told them I was armed. Still nothing. Just silence. I could feel my hand shaking around the flashlight. Then I remembered the night vision app on my phone, something I downloaded. I opened the app, aimed my phone into the dark, and there he was, a shape standing between two trees barely 10 feet from me. Too still, I froze. The app screen glowed faint green, enough to see the faint outline of a monad or broad shoulders, head tilted slightly like he was studying me. My voice came out weak when I said, I'm armed, don't come closer. He didn't move, he just stood there, long enough for me to start wondering. Then, slowly, quietly, he turned and walked away. Just gone. I didn't move for almost a full minute. Then I sprinted back to camp, zipped up my tent, and sat inside with my knife clutched in one hand and the flashlight in the other. The forest went dead silent. If you've ever been in deep woods at night, you know silence isn't normal. That kind of silence eats at you, makes you doubt what's real and what's not. I don't know when I fell asleep, but when the sun came up, I started packing like my life depended on it. I didn't care about breakfast. Didn't care about anything except leaving. And that's when I saw him again. He was standing maybe 30 yards away. Half hidden behind a pine tree, I shouted at him, told him again I am armed, that I'd shoot if he followed me. He didn't move. I turned and walked, forcing myself not to run until I was out of sight. Then I ran like hell. It took me most of the day to reach my car. By the time I got there, it was nearly dark again. I threw my gear in the back seat and drove home, hands shaking the whole way. When I got inside, I realized my phone was gone. I tore through my pack, checked every pocket. Nothing. I told myself I must have dropped it during the panic. That's what I needed to believe. A week later, I got home and saw a small cardboard box sitting on my doorstep. No label. No postage, just sitting there. I thought maybe I'd ordered something and forgotten, but when I picked it up, my stomach dropped. It was light, and the tape sealing it wasn't from any store. It looked like it had been cut and reapplied several times. Inside was my phone, completely wiped clean. No photos, no messages, not even a SIM card, just a blank screen that lit up with my reflection staring back at me. The phone had been locked. There's no way anyone could have gotten into it without the passcode. I checked every window, every corner of the yard. Nothing. That night I went to the police. They listened politely, but it was clear they didn't take me seriously. One of them even smirked and said, well, at least he returned your property. I wanted to scream. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't funny. That man had followed me for hours through the woods. He'd watched me in the dark. He'd found my house. The officer told me to install cameras and keep an eye out. That was it. That was Wing. 3 days ago. Since then, nothing's happened. I don't know what that thing in the woods wanted, or how it found me, or why it gave my phone back. But deep down, I know this isn't over.